Okay, welcome back after the break, and we got more things to do, and we better just get about doing it. I sort of in trying to develop a framework, and it's going to have to be a framework that can accommodate and integrate the kind of things we're talking about today, and it's very hard for me to know how to kind of do that in here without dropping into kind of details that can bore people, etc. And so this is an experiment. And one of the ways I keep telling people what I really need to have is people that can come as fellows from some of these different environments, and we can cohabit for 2-3 months and working on this together, so we can take these examples of this sort of thing and piece them together in a kind of framework of details about, okay, so what would you do? Where could a NIC form? And when you look at the complexity of what they're offering, suggesting, you realize that it is going to take a strategic approach in order to get things moving, etc. So the strategies, we keep coming back to these elements of bootstrapping and strategy, which all by themselves don't grab people very well. So that it takes some fitting together. So anyway, I have hope. But I'll just pick up a little bit here and talking, and then we'll start having more speakers. It's very, very interesting, and it's kind of nice for me to sit and listen. But this business of the coevolution, it's just a very real, basic sort of thing in there. And what we could pick out here, we say, well, in order to co-evolve the kind of capabilities we're talking about, it's going to have to be generally a number of proactive communities who are doing their work with new and evolving tools, conventions, dialogue practices, knowledge sharing policies, collaborative generation of both next stage and long-range evolution, etc. But these have to be the organizations trying to move out into that frontier. And so that's what we have to sort of find and recruit those. And then at a meta level, we have to start learning what it is that works and trying to integrate that. And then also among the kind of innovative tools and processes and things like that, can we start feeding and cross-feeding these things to sort of show these different communities what's possible and let them choose and move with the best visibility they can have of what other communities similar. So the whole domain of governments at all these different levels would just be an extremely challenging, interesting one. And the complexity of the world is just going to demand that that infrastructure of organizations has to get better and better at doing the job, because the job's going to be moving faster into more complexity and things like that. So anyway, it's a very rich need, and so we could say, well, we'll ask you back next week with the solutions, all right? So anyway, the sort of thing that these proactive user communities working together, they have to have better sharing and cooperative effectiveness, and that takes attitudes, spirit, bonding, work practices, etc. to sort of say, well, it isn't my job right now, or if someone's going to define a job that I'm supposed to do in order to be part of the improvement, well, they probably don't define it very well because it's still very loose and fluid. So what's just going to happen is communities get built up, and they have to start cultivating the sort of cooperation way of doing it, which in many cases runs against the sort of culture from which they come. But I would guess that in the governmental sort of domains, it could well be a little less problem than in the business. But there's still a lot of details there that I hesitate to bet very much on that. So anyway, the sort of thing that we need to keep looking at too is, hey, these new capabilities for doing that collaborative work really are going to depend very, very much upon enhancing what these electronic documents contain in them and the kind of properties that you use and the way you employ it, etc. So we sort of keep getting hit a little bit about dragging into the technology side of it, the so-called, but look, it's just what's really going to start making the capabilities grow, and that has to co-evolve with the other practices, etc. So, there are some people that don't want to talk very much about, they call the technology, but it's sort of like, hey, I don't want to talk about the books and the pages, and I don't want to talk about the way you have footnotes and indices, etc., that you can start to learning. Those equivalents are going to be in the tool systems that they build, and they'll be very important in learning how to fly in that thing. At the same time, the people that are interested in those details like that have to start recognizing that the processes and the procedures, etc., that people are going to employ out there also are going to be very real. And these people have ideas about what you could shift and would be actually suggesting, could your technology do this for us? And that's the kind of coevolution we really have to have. So anyway, these sort of things just really have to emerge. So when we give the examples like this of people describing the problems, etc., we just really have to realize that the hope for all of this thing is going to come from really getting proactive coevolution going. And that's what it's going to take. So here's just an example. If we were going to work just on the document and the technology and the properties and the capabilities like that, you're going to need up here your capability evolution communities, the ones that really want to use it. They have to be watching and evolving their human system aspects. And it also needs that they have to do the development, integration, application going on of the open source tools and the standards for the way the document structure goes, and the dynamic knowledge base that's supposed to be describing this. So what focus you give to the particular dynamic knowledge base is something that's a very important strategic issue. So it's like, hey, the very first ones ought to be on a dynamic knowledge base upon how you develop dynamic knowledge bases for a while, and then how you develop communities that work together, etc., and just gradually spread out to the bigger part of the world. But unless you get a nucleus like this working, you're going to have a very hard time doing much effective coevolution out into the big world, etc., like that. So this is the kind of, I wonder if I would do better on the Bible tour or something. Anyway, so this sort of, the issue about, the human system evolvers, we get people coming about the technology and the tool systems, etc., but why don't we find the kind of people that come up and say, hey, it's not, I don't want them to say, hey, you're ignoring this. It's like saying, hey, how do we start getting ideas about how the human system side can work better? How would we sort of specify what they could do in order that they could be learning better how to use what's there now and be a real proactive partner in evolving the tools better while they're doing their job? So that's what it's going to take, is people from a number of representative communities that have to be involved in this will be brought together in some of the early takeoffs. So which communities to try to encourage bringing together is going to be happenstance. Where can you find them that would be willing and have the resources and interest? But on the other hand, they also be that some of them will make have much more effect upon the early evolution of what we're talking about doing. See. So now we come to, we're going to have to introduce Joan Bozak. It's your turn, John, and I didn't know how much to put in here. Are you going to tell about yourself a little bit as you get going?
Sure.
Right, okay, it's up to you. So there's a... There you are. How about that?
Thank you, Doug. Oh, good, it's there. All right. Hi, my name is Joan Bozak. I work for Sun Microsystems. As I forgot, as usual, to say on my slide. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Scott. I'm really delighted to be here today. Partly, but not totally, of course, because this is the first presentation I've given in 4 years that wasn't about XML. I'm so happy. I said during one of the sessions here about 3 or 4 weeks ago, a proposal had been made, very interesting proposal had been made for the beginnings of doing a dynamic knowledge repository, and I said, hey, I've got an application in mind for this, And Doug and Marcelo have been kind enough to give me a soapbox on which to talk a little bit about this. The seed for this idea that I'm about to spin out for you was planted by a fellow named Ken Clements, who is one of my fellow Foresight Institute senior, what do we call those, associates? Yes, thank you. Tanya's nodding. I got it right. We met at a social event, a nano schmooze, in Palo Alto in November, and I had come from a very trying day of a session of an organization I work with called Oasis and the United Nations. And we had assembled 150 of the world's top electronic commerce people over in San Jose. And I had sort of staggered out of this meeting going, give me something else. And I sat down with Ken, and here I'd been spending several years working with what you could consider an improvement community in W3C and this other one in Oasis in the UN, and developing this thing called XML. And Ken, it turns out, had spent a similar amount of time working with an organization called the IEEE, developing something I think called 802.11, which is an incredibly complex application of wireless networking. And so we were sort of comparing war stories about this, and the idea of how you actually get standards to work, and how you get different people to agree on things. And he came up with this idea, which you're about to see the result of. And I sort of went home and it kind of cooked inside my head. And what came out, I wish to give credit to Ken for anything good in this, and take the blame for the more bizarre aspects of what I'm going to suggest. I'm chiefly interested in the idea of collective IQ. I've seen it work. When it works, it's a wonderful thing. You know, groups of people can come up with ideas that are beyond one person. That's my idea of collective IQ. And Doug has pointed out to us earlier in this series of colloquia that we have certain large problems that are going to need to be solved, and we're going to need collective IQ to solve those problems. And I believe that's true, and I believe that has a direct effect on all of us. Now, the solutions that have been proposed revolve around the idea of better information. I think better information is absolutely necessary, but I would like to start with an observation about that, okay? My observation is that not all disagreements are due to misunderstandings or lack of information. Probably the most obvious example known to all of us is the abortion debate, all right? People disagree on this subject, and they're not going to stop disagreeing if you provide better information to them, right? So here we have a social policy problem that's not going to be solved only by better information and better communication. My observation is that a lot of the big problems we're facing that we need to solve share this property to some extent. For example, we spent a good deal of time earlier thinking about the energy problem. Well, anybody who listened to the gentleman who explained just exactly the size of our energy problem and went off and thought about it for 5 minutes, I think would come to the conclusion that we're going to end up solving the energy problem by using less of it, right? You don't have to be Einstein to figure that one out based on the figures they were giving us. Now, how are we going to do with less energy? Well, there are basically two ways to go about it. Either we can share what energy there is fairly, or the rich people can use up whatever's left. Okay? So, right? I mean, the basic question is, are we or are we not going to get people out of driving big cars like the one I've got and onto the bus, or not, right? That is not a question that is going to be solved completely by better information. All right? We need something more there. So I would like to talk about augmenting the DKR itself. A little joke there for those of you who've been following the course. Dynamic knowledge repositories are essential to what I'm going to propose, but what I want to say is that they're a necessary but not a sufficient thing to solve some of these enormous problems. The big problems are going to require us not just to design solutions, but also to agree to be bound by those solutions. We're going to have to actually be able to take somebody who won't get on the bus and drag them out of the car and put them on the bus if we're going to solve the energy problem, right? So it's not enough just to say, you now know that this is the answer. We're going to have to compel that. So the question I want to try to address here is, how do we facilitate the process of making legally binding decisions? How do we do that, right? We have an answer to this. We have a traditional answer to this problem. We have a process. I brought you some examples of this. Here are the standing orders of the House of Commons of Parliament, published by the Stationery Department. Here's a process. This will solve large problems. And this is not new. Pieces of this go back 4 centuries. Right? It's called the parliamentary procedure, or parliamentary process. In the United States, we have a standard form of this thing, and I bought the latest copy of this along with me. It's called Robert's Rules of Order. How many people know about Robert's Rules of Order? Yeah, I didn't say love it, did I? All right. Okay, every time, so this is how Ken and I got started in our conversation, because we both happen to be working in organizations that run according to Robert's Rules of Order. If you go look, you'll find out that this thing is deeply woven into our entire legal and social structure. Pretty much every corporation, university, all 87,000 governments that you just heard about, they all run according to this or some minor variation of it. Right? So we have a process. Well, what's wrong with it? It's slow, it's complicated, and worst of all, it does not work online worth a damn. Okay? This is the real problem here. This is like, well, never mind, I won't get into it. Because I've had to read it lately, or pieces of it. So we don't want to do this. All right? We don't want to deal with this. So instead, we try for consensus-based solutions. Well, we'll just develop a consensus, all right, and do this. The problem is that consensus-based processes won't deal with all those big problems where people just don't want to agree on something. Where I don't want to give up my car. I don't want to get on the bus. I'm not going to give you my consensus. What are you going to do about it? Right? So consensus is not going to work for a big class of these problems. I was explaining to Doug that PowerPoint was too advanced for me. If only the parliamentary procedure we've got worked online. There are some really, really good things about this ancient thing. It's the epitome of democracy. When we say democracy, in practice, we're talking about Roberts. All right? That's what majority rule works out to be if you spend long enough figuring out all the corner cases. You get 700 pages, right? It's, Lord knows, comprehensive. It's fully documented. You can go into any bookstore in the country and get a copy of Roberts. Right? You can order it from Amazon. It's thoroughly debugged. The reason it's 700 pages long is because by this time they've figured out all the hard problems. There's a solution in there somewhere. And surprisingly, it's capable of bootstrapping itself. You can take a Roberts process. A Roberts process starts out with a group of people milling around in a room and turns them into what's called a deliberative assembly. That's pretty amazing, right? The heart of the problem, I think, is that mail is too slow to conduct a real parliamentary process. You can do pieces of it. You can hold mail ballots. But you can't do things like amend motions. It's just, I'm sorry, the cycle is too long here. So the solution is not to simply transpose the traditional process isomorphically into email. That won't work. We need a different way of looking at this. I will suggest to you a different way. My observation is as follows. Any process that's set up according to Roberts is a state machine. Now, I'm not saying it could be. I'm saying it is. It was 200 years ago, a state machine. What is its state? Its state is the information that gets saved when you adjourn. So if you say at any moment in a deliberative assembly, oh, we got to adjourn for the day, you're going to save state. Right? And you move from state to state in a determined way. Does this sound familiar? Okay. The parliamentary motions, there are 84 of them in the current edition of Roberts, can be looked at as commands to this machine. It's instruction set. Right? Think about it this way with me. Perhaps we can instantiate such machines in software. Interesting idea. Where does it go? Well, Ken and I came up with this thing we call the parliamentary assistant. Let's think about one of these machines running on a web server. All right? The server takes care of all the procedural details and maintains the document base. So it's done a great deal of the work here. And interaction with this machine takes place through forms that the server generates to the user. Not unlike ordering a book at Amazon.com, right? Or working with a game. If we can make this thing work fast enough and interactively enough, the social dynamics of such a thing could start to resemble the social dynamics of a multi-user game. So perhaps we can take technology that we're using for electronic commerce and technology we're using for Dungeons and Dragons and put it together here to make a framework by which you could actually make decisions. Here are some of the benefits of this thing. First of all the procedure would be handled by the server. All the 700 pages of absolutely impossible to follow nits can be handled by the machine. Great, that's what machines are for, right? One of the consequences of this, I know that all of you have had experience with a Roberts process in which some jerk got into the process and started raising points of order. You can't have a point of order, because you can't do it. You're not offered any choices that aren't legal. Okay? So there goes that whole bunch of stuff. It's no longer a problem. You can't have priority conflicts between speakers. Most of the machinery of traditional parliamentary procedure is saying, you've got the floor. No, you have the floor. Right? It's about people not interrupting each other. Well, guess what? In this kind of setup, you can't interrupt each other. Something comes in 1 millisecond later than something else, it's later. Okay? So it's not a problem deciding what the priority of things is. The key to this, if it works, is that if it's properly implemented, this thing could be substituted in situ, in place, for existing processes. This is the key here. I'm not talking about something that would be cool in terms of helping us figure things out. I'm talking about taking the school board down the street, or General Motors Corporation, or the state of California, or the Synod of Bishops of the Lutheran Church, or any of those other organizations that run by Roberts, or something very close to it, and saying, tomorrow you can start using this environment that's a great deal more fun and a great deal more efficient, and a lawyer will say that what you're doing is legally equivalent to what you were doing before. If we can't do that, this idea doesn't work, right? So that's the idea. Now, if you start thinking about a parliamentary process as a machine, the neat thing is you can start to apply some machine concepts to it. For example, the concept of recursion is thoroughly, the traditional process is saturated with the concept of computer recursion. When you amend something, you make a motion to amend something, and then you make a motion to amend the amendment. At each stage, you're calling the same process, aren't you? In fact, Roberts says that when the language it uses for popping up from an amendment to the thing that was being amended, it's said to recur. It's very explicit about this, okay? A related concept is the idea of multitasking, which is really another kind of recursion in this sense. When a deliberative assembly, that's a bunch of people who are getting together and using this process, decide to form a committee, they're spawning a child process. They're creating a miniature automaton here, etc. All right? So in implementing this thing, you could get a lot of efficiency by saying, okay, once we've got the machinery for handling a motion, we've got the machinery for handling any stack of motions. Once we've got the machinery for setting up one of these things, we've got the machinery for setting up any number of levels of subcommittees. Right? Optimization. We can start thinking about machine optimizations here. One of the things that really slows a traditional process down is that you can only talk about one thing at once. Okay? So for example, if a motion is before us, and at the same time we want to talk about shall we stop debating this motion, we have to set aside the motion in order to talk about shall we stop debate on it. Now, because the motion to stop debate on a motion is not as self-debatable, there's no reason you really have to do that. In a machine, you could have the discussion over whether we should stop debate handled in the background, in a separate track from the thing you were actually talking about. So you could start collapsing some of the time frame here, all right? You could extend that thought to saying, let's separate the main thing that we're talking about and trying to make up our mind on, the main motion and its amendments, from discussions about when we'll hold the next meeting, or should we remove somebody, or so on, that are administrative. Roberts actually makes this distinction, but in language that you have to work very hard at to figure out that's what's really going on. Okay? We could have user interface here. We could use current and future user interface engineering to create a different kind of environment. All the web machinery we've got that we're building to do business can be used for this purpose. You know, fill in forms, menus, this kind of thing. And notice that the form that's generated for any user at any instance in this process has only menus for the things that are legal at that point. You don't even have to remember anymore what you're supposed to be able to do. It's just like ordering. You know, you're only going to be presented with the things you're able to do at that point. I think a really slick interface to such a thing would not only show you what's legal to do, but would let you preview the state of the machine if you did it. Right? So you could say, where exactly would we be if I did do this? Right? And it would say, here's where you would be. So basically what you could do, what Ken and I were observing is that Roberts works pretty well once you understand it, once you have studied up on it. And in fact, if that weren't true, we wouldn't have labor unions and church groups and sewing circles and a whole bunch of, you know, popular forms of this thing able to work. But the way they do it is they appoint one of their members to be an expert and call that person the parliamentarian, right? That's how they do it. So what we're saying here is you don't have to do that anymore, right? This process will hold your hand there. Now, I have to point out that one of the things I like best about this is that you reduce the function of the chair. It's the chair who slows this ordinary process down, right? But if the chair doesn't have to decide priority conflicts over who's got the floor, and if the chair doesn't have to keep track of what the procedure is, and if the chair doesn't have to do most of the things the chair does, you cut a lot of latency out of the operation of the machine. However, there are some things that are going to be real problems. Setting agendas is a real problem. I don't know how to get around that one. Checking lexical form, what do I mean by that? Roberts says you cannot say, I move that we not do X. You have to say, I move that we do X. That's a classic example of something that is brain dead simple for a human being to decide and really hard for a machine, right? So that's a problem. The problem of whether something is relevant to the discussion, which a chair is supposed to do, that's a problem. So I'm not trying to say that this has been completely thought through. On the contrary, I'm saying more work needs to be done here. If this could be done, it could have potentially revolutionary implications for society, I think. A distributed and asynchronous yet legally binding process would make possible global decision making by people who are distributed in space and time, and local decision making. I would like my neighborhood to be able to decide what the speed limit is going to be on my street, for example, and everything in between. All 87,000 of those governments could be implemented this way, right? If it works, and I emphasize to you that remains to be seen, this could be a viable way to solve the big problems facing us. So I think there's a lot of promise here and a lot of working out to do. This is the first group I have even shown this idea to. I think it's directly related to what we've been talking about, which is the improvement of processes and decision making. But it's going to take some work to find out if there's anything to it. The first reaction I had to this idea from a very smart fellow I work with at Sun was he couldn't decide whether this was insanely great or greatly insane. Okay, I don't know either. It will take some groups to figure it out. The relationship here is that these parliamentary assistants assume the existence of a dynamic knowledge repository. You'll remember I said, hey, I've got an app for a DKR. This is an app for a DKR. You have to be able to manage large bodies of data and cruise around in them and say, where were we last week and what was that thing we decided? That all has to be in place before you can make this idea work. There's something else, during this course, one of the things that's hard to keep track of is where we are in the layers of abstraction. We've got improving things, and then we've got improving the process of things, and we've got improving the process of improving things, you know. Right, where are we in that? If this is practical, this would be, if nothing else, a way to do the kind of work that Ken and I do, which is where we came from in the first place. Gee, wouldn't it be great if in our committee work we had something like this? So we could, this would provide governance for improvement communities as well as being an improvement process. The development of this idea, if it goes anywhere, if I find enough crazy people willing to spend some time fleshing this idea out, we will work within the organization I work in called Oasis, the Organization for the Advancement of Structured Information Standards. And the reason we'll do that is because it's easy to join, $250 a year, such a deal, and because it runs under Roberts. So we'll be using the process itself to develop the process we're using, right? So there's a certain neatness that appeals to geeks about that, right? If you're interested in this, you can look at one of these URLs. The formatting that the organizers did has changed these lines, but it's okay, all the information's there. There are two URLs up on the screen. One is the proposal itself, which is in much more detail than what I've just said, and a preliminary plan of action. Both URLs begin with the string http://metalab.unc.edu/Bozak, B-O-S-A-K, /PA. The only difference is one then is pa.htm and the other one is pa-act.htm. You can also contact us by mail at the addresses given at the bottom of the screen. So if you... And this will be, yeah, the slides will be online. So basically, as you'll see when you read the plan of action, Ken and I are checking around to see who else thinks this is worth investing some time in. If you think it's interesting enough after you've read through these two documents, get back to us. Thanks.
I think that makes a great environment for the rest of the world problem, because yes, you've got your procedural actions help get cleaned up and organized, and then you got a better environment to take all the knowledge that you're going to have to develop about the changing world and handle that too. So this, I just donated a slide here for you could go take a look and that. So I have to find out now. So this is your world. I thought I had caught a glimpse of my world. Well, let's see, in a minute I would... Well, I get up to this one right away. I was going to say a few words, so don't get up yet. Yeah. You know, it's interesting just to hear all this discussion, a lot of it, because it would make a good example. It would say, okay, it sort of cleans up the way in which the knowledge you're going to have to put together can get exercised if you have to make decisions. But there also have to be a lot of careful propositions and plans and designs, and the kind of new knowledge that's going to take to even plot a way through problems that, and before you get to be meaningful decision making and agreement, etc., like that. So there's just seemingly a huge marketplace for better collective knowledge development in the middle of that too. So anyway, and so it'd just be very much fun to have that be part of the evolution. So what we're going to do next is he says, just call him Aki. And anyway, I met him 2.5 years ago, I think, when Jeff Rulison was guiding me around, and Shinya's back there, his father, along with Aki, were helping arrange meetings inside of Japan to see if people in Japan would get interested in the bootstrap idea. And so a year ago, last November, they actually got people together and they formed a Japanese chapter of the Bootstrap Alliance. And so we're curious about how it goes and the intent of it, etc. And so Aki's chance to come by here and visit is a very good chance just to say, well, how are things in Japan, and what's the chances of things in Japan kind of getting focused in a way that we can cooperate with here better, etc. So it's yours. Now I have to go find your... There we are, right? You know, that's the one. Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Doug, thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a very great pleasure for me. Anyway, the great work on a series of sessions you are doing past and another month. So anyway, Paul Sappho mentioned Doug's unfinished revolution, but I think it's still Doug is working on this, so that I should say Doug's ongoing revolution toward next decade. So I'm working closely with him. Alan mentioned some Californian notorious DMV. I recall I lived here 3 years from '94. Then my wife passed the test. She got the paper, as you know. She has to renew the paper 5 times. 1 year later, she got a license. That is a different country, I thought. In Japan, as you know, the ballot train, every 6 minutes, without no delay with a second. So our country is the working time basis. So that's some difference between the countries. I started my career as a computer engineer a long time ago. In the late 60s, we designed the computers. You may know or not, 1K core memory with 4K DRAM, 18-inch rack and 6-foot height. The other day, we talked our old people, friends. So we used a bucket full of transistors and so on to creating those cabinets. I forgot what I said in the past, but my friend said, you said those cabinets will become the lunchbox computer in future. Did I say it? Yes, you said. So I asked my wife, please find out my lunchbox. I'll show you my lunchbox. This is the size of what I said in the mid-60s. If I'm fancy enough, like Alan Kay, maybe I'm famous. But I missed a chance. So this is the original one is the aluminum. The new one is the plastic anyway. So this size, this thick and thick. So my age, those portions filled up with rice. And this portion is the assorted vegetables, sometimes meat, sometimes fish. Now my kids' generation, different. They grow taller than me and so on. But anyway, this is a kind of joke anyway. So I think it's the world is changing, so I think it's a bunch of revolution will coming up every second, I think. So I remember the Doug, as he started the FJCC in '68. I got his copy of the paper in late '69, I remember. At that time, I couldn't understand what he mentioned. It's very sophisticated. Then after a quarter century, as he mentioned, we get together in Tokyo. So he explained about bootstrap alliance, bootstrapping. It's so hard to understand, especially with the beer. But I have to say something. Therefore, I talked about our TQC, Total Quality Management, what we did in the past, and also Fujizok's providing some new work way, which is younger generation can propose his own idea to the senior management, like a small piece of the venture mind. So anyway, I felt something, what he mentioned. I didn't fully understand. But anyway, he asked me to join the Bootstrap Alliance. So I sent the money and joined it. But anyway, one item he said, collective IQ. It's quite familiar with us, because brush up the IQ in my age we did, just for getting into the university or college and so on. IQ is very strong in Japan, but some case very sensitive word for Japanese people. But I'm very much interested in his talk. Therefore, we should start some activities in Japan. Then we started a kickoff seminar with Doug, and then around this number of people get together and then started to understand what he mentioned. So I think is what is the best way to implement bootstrapping, collect or nick, whatever. So if we explaining nick itself or bootstrapping itself, maybe it's really tough. Many people couldn't understand. So maybe start with argument. So we couldn't do that. So one thing I started is the chance came. JBMA, which is a Japanese Business Machinery Associations, which is a member of all the manufacturer of the fax copier printers. So every year, every other year, they make some proposal for the companies, the vendors, or some standardizations. I was called in late '68. Then coincidentally, after close to the DAG meeting, JBMA asked me to chair some committees, which is providing some office services standard created by Japanese people. Mostly those standards coming from US, and then we'll use it and then implement and so on. At first time, I called membership companies about 20. So 20 people get together. I don't know most people. I didn't know most people. So I started what we should do. So the beginning is only 20 people. But now is under me is 150 people working together. We are now providing some solutions which will be demonstrated May this year. So I will little talk some details. So I don't want to touch with the details technology itself, but mostly the operating system coming from US, and also maybe this will be HTTP, something like that. Those are also coming from US. And then our vendor is working to hook upon our printers or fax mill, whatever, to check with functions. Every time you develop something, we have to work on that. And every company doesn't talk to each other. Therefore, once we introduce a product, they don't talk to each other. That's a big problem inside Japan. We are Japanese manufacturer, the shipping our product, maybe over 70% to worldwide, some other OEM and so on. Therefore, my proposal is we don't want to change these portions. We'll accept everything. However, what kind of the standard, what kind of functionalities we should have it? So we have talked and talked. And then currently we have the designate in the 4-5 functions. So define all the common services by devices. So if we can meet this context, then we can talk wherever we go. If I bring the some PC here, I want to print it out, I will find out any printout. Rather than somebody ask, I have to ask, please print this paper and so on. So those kind of activities is ongoing. Then we'll working on these areas, discovery, all the printers, peripherals, and so on, and then common data format and job device control. Those activities are now almost maybe 70–80% is achieved. So we are now jointly providing this kind of room. Every company brings all the peripherals or networking and so on, started to collaborating. This is a very rare case in Japan. Used to be each company has his own ideas. They don't disclose each other. But NIC idea solve the problems. So I think these kind of activity this is a very typical technology side, but I think those kind of idea can be diversified. So we think traditional Japanese community is a very hierarchical structure, and then we are lifelong services. So from bottom to top, we sit together for over 40 years. So we don't make any document, but understand each other. Same culture, eating same time, everything. One example, I will provide some example for our people. A cooking book, big difference among the countries. UK cooking book, they specify every statement, sentence. Japanese one, just picture and 1 spoon, 2 spoon, that's a small portions. But we are the same culture, so we can understand each other, what we should do. But American is the middle. Those kind of knowledge has to be implemented in also the Japanese community once we have to change our organizations. Mostly the Japanese, as I mentioned, TQC oriented, and then inside company structures, and then mostly the bottom up. The seniority is just observing the activities of those people. Sometimes no concern. Mostly the consensus basis. Just stamp, stamp, stamp. Not fully understanding the meaning of each. Therefore, our organization's strongest was the mass productions, making the product. Even though we don't develop any visions and so on. But we decided what we should make it. It's very strong. And then monocultures, as we can do the high productivities. And we can do some NIC because of we are doing the TQC and so on. But those NIC is industry segmented. For the iron steel manufacturer has his own umbrella. Automobile has his own umbrellas. They don't communicate each other. And also the closed structures. We don't dictate any so much because of the human as being long life service. Therefore, we have to change some paradigm. One is NIC across the companies has to be developed based on Doug's things. We have to erase the organization boundaries or company boundaries. And still, we lack of the network communications. Now is the Japanese telephone company providing iMode, which using telephone for communicating. Just pushing the thumb is pushing the button, and then we can send a mail. It's a Japanese trick, rather than pushing the keyboard. And then bottom model was executed, and then the single race monoculture. Maybe we have to change our paradigm. And then lack of visions. So those kind things we have to modernizing by introducing bootstrapping. So this is one example of what I did in JBMA. Is each company has nominated the first time the 1 or 2 people, but after that most company has 10 people or so. Division is across from the printing divisions and copier divisions or other divisions. They started some collaboration, NIC collaborations. We have 10 companies. Each has his own NIC. And then under the JBMA umbrella, we have our own JBMA NIC now. So we are talking each other beyond the companies. This is the first time. So all the document is open source for membership now. So we are going to open up around the May timeframe because of we show up all the demo at the business show in Tokyo. So after that, we are going to do that. But this is still this level, not going to worldwide and so on. So now we started to how to bring this idea to other countries. So we are thinking about that. So I think these activity will be done in Japan very soon. However, still we have a bunch of the problems, government structures or education and so on. So this level, we have to change our paradigm. So I think it's the Bootstrap Alliance Japan will be one of the driver for the changing the community, I think. And also network economy will be implemented very soon. And then we hope to bring this idea into the Japanese government national project. But it takes time. So anyway, I think it's a small other individual project that started, SUIMI, led by Yamada. And then this is a kind of the software houses get together. But the small software houses implemented, but they don't have enough sales force. In such case, we're providing some common database or repositories who can access from outside. So those are started. Currently, the only few examples we have. But anyway, I think so. We, as a summary, in the past, we are very strong on the quality, producing quality product, and then we have some NIC activities based on TQC, but inside company. But now we feel it's important to change our company attitude and also working global as worldwide. So I think this colloquium is one of the tools for driving, accessing these ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we have 20 minutes or so that we could use. I think the best thing we could do is to get some dialogue going among people here and with it. And so you people get a chance to talk, ask questions of these guys. Give it to them. And then they could talk to each other, and then we could get other people talking. So.
I have a question for John. I think your idea sounded very interesting to me. But one thought which came to mind, well, there are two thoughts. One is that interface could be an issue, and the second is I can sort of imagine if this thing were to work that you could have a lot of parallelism and multiple things happening at the same time, and then might you have a problem with trying to figure out the order, coming up with the word, when you sequentialize it. You know the word.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I don't have the right word either, but I know what you're talking about. Basically, if it can't operate, how am I going to put this? There's got to be a clock cycle during which events are asynchronous. And I think that cycle is the cycle it takes between the time you say, okay, we're going to vote on something, and the time you finish voting. Okay, I can't see a good way to get that period down below about 48 hours if the process is going to include people who are traveling. Okay, so if I'm going to be able to get on a plane for Tokyo and arrive there and get my stuff sorted out and figure out where my hotel is and get in and check my mail and actually think about something, typically 48 hours is about the minimum that I can get there. My observation about parallelism is that if you study the traditional process, it's full of very confusing terminology about 4 different classes of motions, and it's so confusing I can't even remember what they're called. Main motions, subsidiary, and there are a couple of other categories. But what's really going on there is that the traditional categorization in Roberts separates out the ones that have to follow that clock cycle because they're being voted on and debated, and the ones that are undebatable. It's the undebatable ones that you could do with very little lag, okay, or that you could parallel process. Working out all the details is something that hasn't been done yet. Interface, I'm not sure what you see the problem is.
Well, maybe just because I can conceive of drawing a finite state automaton or a Turing machine, however you're going to model it, but going from that model to the interaction with the human being is the part which I have a hard time envisioning.
Okay, yeah. The interface, and I really ought to sit down with a drawing program and map it out better, okay? But the interface I have in mind is one in which you ping the machine, it knows who you are, just as it would know who you were if you were ordering shoes, okay? And it knows what your past history is, which is important for little details like you can't second your own motion, right? So it has to track who you are. But at any moment, it would present to you what the state is at the time, and while there are some interface design decisions to be made about what the best way is to do that, they're all really old problems because all we're talking about presenting you is exactly the same information you would have had to be presented with 100 or 200 years ago. Okay, what is the motion pending? What is the text of the motion? Are there amendments to it? What are those amendments? Etc. Okay, so all you're talking about is conveying exactly the same information we have to now. Plus, and this I think is the real benefit of the scheme if it works, is it would show you through menus what you could do, what commands would be legal at that point. The hardest part about a Roberts process is knowing what you legally can do at any given point. And what I'm saying is that it'd be relatively easy, as such things go, to give you only menus only of the things that were in order, as they say, at that moment. So actually, the interface, I think, is the strongest part of the idea. Questions, the weakest part of the idea are questions of, for example, how do you establish an agenda? I think there are some issues there that are pretty deep.
Well, this is first something for John again. There are a tremendous number of government organizations today grappling with the issue of how to use the internet to debate public issues. And this idea of yours certainly fits hand in glove, so to speak, with this issue they're trying to grapple with. Right now, I know that several governmental institutions within California have actually contracted with the League of Women Voters to act as the moderating authority, so to speak, in town hall chat rooms to discuss these issues. And so I don't necessarily have a question. You can feel free to comment on this, but I think you'll have some very willing partners, and I can name quite a few right now that would be interested in talking to you about this, because it's a situation they're trying to figure out how to handle. How do you discuss these things in an open forum? And then just another issue that you're going to immediately run into is people who do not have access to the technology to use this. And that's very separate from what you're doing, is developing a product to facilitate this. But in the implementation, that's where you're going to run into your definitely a very visible barrier today.
Yeah, interestingly, the Brown Act, which is familiar to most of us who live in California because it guarantees open access to all those governments up and down the line, actually, under the Brown Act, what I just proposed is illegal. All right, the Brown Act forbids the use of any electronic, I don't remember the exact language, but any electronic means of including telephone conferences. You can't even hold a telephone conference because its effect is to limit access, right? It's not like being able to walk in. What I assert in the much longer paper that I referred to is that if this were properly designed, we could get that law changed, because this, if you take into account the difficulty of getting to an open meeting, right, versus the increasing curve. In other words, you've got a rising curve of difficulty in physically getting to something and a falling curve in the difficulty of getting to it online. At some point, those things cross, and while there will always be people who can't get there online, just as there are now a lot of people who can't get there in person, right, at some point, more people will be given access through an online version than are now given access through the in-person version.
Can I ask another question? This is Faraki. In Japan, it is my understanding that there's a very different relationship between government and private sector than in the United States, and that may be just a false impression, but you can certainly correct me on that. But I'm interested in what it will take to create the higher levels of improvement community that you envisioned in Japan, where you had businesses working within themselves to improve, and now you're creating a dialogue between businesses. But what will it take in Japan to create more of a worldwide approach, a global approach as you envision? What will it really require, and how can a group like this help you?
Well, it's a good question. Anyway, I can say we, senior management in Japan, has to be changed to leadership through qualities. Mostly the Japanese attitude is bottom prepared order document for the seniors. For example, if somebody invited the talk, he doesn't talk by himself. Somebody representing him. Those kind of attitude is a kind of a Japanese normal way. So like in Silicon Valley, most of the top management can talk going his own way, doing business like such a way. But in Japan, it's starting from bottom to going up. Takes time. So we are losing a lot of business time. So we have to change. So I think it's that some portion we should keep our mind bottom up. But in some sense, we have to take the top-down approach, especially the worldwide negotiations.
If I could ask a question to Aki also. In my work at SRI, I've seen that there's more and more similarity between U.S. companies and Japanese companies. There's somewhat of a melding. What's your perception on that? And also that Japanese-style management seems to be changing towards U.S. style, and U.S. style more towards Japanese style.
I spent here 3 years, and then I've learned some activities in U.S. structure, especially Silicon Valley. So I think it's these kind of paradigm I'm implementing in my small company now. So I think it's workable. A large corporation, it takes another time, another 10 years, I think, because of the all the infrastructure, social securities or medical cares, and salaries are divided based on age basis. So a small company can change their paradigm.
Neil?
My name's Neil Jacobstein, and at the risk of being impolite, I would suggest that we don't have 10 years to organize these kinds of activities, because 10 years of calendar time is like 70 years of web time. So because of the acceleration factor that we discussed earlier, that kind of thinking, I think, is going to lead us to a situation where we don't have the capacity infrastructure to deal with the changes that we're likely to see over the next 10 years. So I guess my question for you is there an opportunity to accelerate the critical path by calling on individuals in companies, perhaps individuals that are members of quality interest groups, that are meeting outside of the walls of their institutions, that are self-selected, that are interested in moving forward, and that can move quickly to accelerate the critical path?
Yeah, I said that 10 years are just for the total Japanese government and means infrastructure change. So I think it's we are now talking several key guys in each companies. So we should have some interest group, then we can accelerate. I hope.
Okay, Dave Crocker.
Thank you. Actually, this is perfect timing because I've been having a mixed reaction to the series of presentations. On the one hand, especially the first two, my reaction is thank heavens people are working with the policy and government folks because they need a lot of help. And I don't mean that derogatorily. This is complicated new technology. Most people don't understand it well. We're trying to use it to change very important processes, many of which have been around a long time. My experience is that even people who are well-intentioned but not well plugged in have difficulty understanding this. And so as reporters try to cover these topics, they get it wrong. Which is why as some efforts get made, we find reports which say, well, somebody's upset about this. And they think that's news. And yet, for any interesting process, there's always somebody upset. And I'm not rambling. This actually is quite relevant to the point because I think that ideas like trying to instantiate well-documented, not necessarily well understood, but well-documented procedures that have been developed over a very long period of time and worries about laws and other things that are inadequate or too adequate, which is, say, too stringent or not stringent enough. All of what really is the difficult problem here is not putting the machinery in place, not educating the policymakers, but trying all of us to worry about perspective. The perspective is 10 years is too long. The counter to that is we're talking about changing institutions that have taken centuries to develop. 10 years is too short. Now, the truth is probably both of my statements, and I don't know how to reconcile that. Equally, and I have increasingly become sensitive to this, we have the perspective for many, many reasons, which is really strictly U.S.-centric. And we have forgotten, as much as we think we haven't, how many other perspectives there are. And so some of the, I'll take a simple example, which is Robert Rules of Order, or its variant as appropriate, probably will work well in certain countries. Japan, I would expect very well, possibly Germany, maybe some others. I guarantee you, in spite of the fact that it has an English, a British background in law, it won't work in Malaysia. It won't work in most of the world. And in fact, I don't think it would work here real well. Because while there are some institutional processes that absolutely go in line with Robert's Rules of Orders, that's not where the real work gets done. That's where the final decision-making gets done, but not the real work. And hence, the thing that I was finding myself reacting down the line, and now I'll stop, is I think each of the things every one of you have said is absolutely right. If we take the view that it's right as a beginning point, which we then should look at as being wrong, which is to say, look at how does it not fit. So it provides a good base of reference, but that the interest to come from it will be to look for the ways it is inadequate. And again, a simple example, because it's the most precise, is instituting Robert's Rules of Orders is vastly too mechanical for most human daily work. But it's a good starting point.
Does somebody in the back want to talk? Okay.
Could I respond to that?
Could you go to a microphone first, otherwise the webcast people...
Could I respond to that?
Oh, excuse me. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to make
Robert's Rules of Order.
I just wanted to make one comment. I was forced into looking at Roberts. I picked it up. I had to deal with it 25 years ago, and when I realized I would have to look at it again, it was with a sinking heart, I can tell you. Okay. But what I've come to the conclusion after a couple of months of dealing with this and figuring out Oasis committee procedure, and so have the other members of the committee I'm on, that Roberts is essentially what you will get even if you start over, as long as what you're talking about is majority rule. This is the key. The cultures you're talking about where it won't work and the situations you're talking about where it won't work are ones in which majority rule won't work. Okay, it isn't the machinery. The machinery is just what you get over 400 years as you explore all the weird cases. Right? What it all boils down to is this is what falls out if you decide you really are going to be ruled by majority rather than consensus.
Okay.
Yes, I'm Ray Glock-Gurneich, and I had a comment which might perhaps be characterized as a point of chaos with regard to the Robert's Rules of Order adaptation. First of all, I was just fascinated by it, and I'm struck that, first of all, I want to make the distinction between what I'll call legislative or policy decisions, I'm calling it legislative to fit into some traditional thinking, and judicial or adjudicative decisions. But I'm not limiting those to government. Just as you did not limit legislative decisions, you included, the kinds of policy-making decisions of the organization that I'm going to go to after this seminar tonight. And similarly, adjudicative or judicial decisions includes not only courts, but it would include administrative hearings. It would include disciplinary items on an agenda of a private organization, etc. And more at a meta level, I'd like to say that legislative decisions is where we purport to be making a decision of substantive policy or prioritization between substantive options. And adjudicative or judicial decisions being where we are purporting to be applying given policy to a particular fact or individual or entity. That's the traditional approach to it. Now for the point of chaos. It is in these legislative decisions that have a numerical input, whether it be strictly majority or some other numerical definition, that the Robert's Rules of Order or any other mechanistic procedure applies. But in judicial or adjudicative kinds of proceedings, one of the things that makes a problem, not necessarily an insoluble problem, is that now our very articulation of procedure becomes discretionary rather than mechanistic. So while in a legislative context you can look up the answer in that 700-page book, in a judicial context the judge is frequently required to weigh as a discretionary matter whether the probative value of this particular evidence outweighs the prejudicial impact on the fact finder, and 1,001 other very discretionary kinds of decisions that strike me as not being susceptible to the kind of mechanisms that we are so far proposing. Now for the real point of chaos. And I got this from the dissenting opinion of Justice Brennan in Magatha versus California, for those of you who are legalists, a death penalty case, that in reality, the legislative process places heavy reliance upon the accumulation of judicial knowledge to inform its substantive choices. Because there are many areas of policy where the legislative process recognizes that this is not something that should have a final formulation this week, this year, or even this decade, but chooses to commit the substantive issues to a judicial process to work out over time. Historically, we call that the common law. We also delegate decisions like to the Public Utilities Commission, et cetera, to work out what should be good energy policy or whatever, et cetera. And that's all. Thank you.
I was just going to say, the longer you talk, the more the other argument.
I quite agree.
Well, thank you very much. And Neil's been waiting, and then Barbara wants to say something.
I think that it's easy to conflate two very different issues. One is the historical perspective or the sort of futures perspective that we have, and I would argue that Doug's is very long. But his impatience is great, and I share that impatience. I think that we all need to have a great deal of impatience about putting some capacity infrastructure in place for dealing with some of the changes that we're going to see. That's very different than the kind of perspective we bring to the table and the kind of issues that we want to look at and how far out into the future we want to look.
Well, I promised Barbara next, and then...
I'll be very fast then. I'll skip one of my comments, but picking up on your impatience, I too have impatience, but my sense is that you're up against human nature when you say 10 years isn't long enough, or is too long, rather. I mean, I've heard talks on global warming which scare the hell out of me, and you wonder why aren't we all out there trying to do something right away, because the world could be, we could be destroyed, and yet no one's doing anything. Well, we don't have the sense of urgency that I get from these scientific talks, and I think what underlies all of this is a fundamental part of human nature, which is that we are very good at denial. We need to be good at denial because we couldn't go on existing in this world if we didn't have that ability. It's a survival skill, but it works against us in situations like this. And you've got to overcome that if you're going to get a sense of urgency about something so abstract.
Well, I understand that denial is a river in Egypt. But you had a sense. I think we can run somewhat after 7 because the films won't run out till 90 minutes after we started. But we can keep talking. Go ahead.
I wanted to say that both of these talks were exciting and combine well, and I'm interested in the possibility that as you develop the software to support Robert's Rules of Order, given that much of it would be asynchronous, and there's a lot of new alternatives that are available to you, whether you can complement the formal decision-making process that body of procedures was designed to address with support for the consensus process, the processing, the pulling off into small groups, having discourse, strengthening the discourse, being able to reference the dynamic knowledge base, and figure out where in the Robert's Rules of Order it would be appropriate to step out of that formal process and into these other processes. And my second point was to also be able to look at other decision-making processes from other cultures and their modes of ordering discourse and see where those might also be built into this support process that you're developing.
I like that. All my instincts about scale and evolution, etc., that there'll be a lot of concurrent change going on, and it's a really good step to make in there to say let's give some mechanical support to the process. It can be awkward at times, especially when people are distributed, and just assume that there's going to be evolution, and the rate at which people are going to have to be able to put together and integrate the knowledge about issues has to go up too at the same time. So that's going to have to be meshed in with the processes that go on about making the decisions and offering the motions. So anyway, it's going to be a great future, and 10 years, yeah, it's hard to tell. So let's see. Who was first over here? You three guys decide.
You were talking about state machines, and John, and usually when people talk about state machines, they mean finite state machines. And finite state machines are revisionist. And I don't think we really want, every deliberative body has to be specified by an infinite state machine, which you can do, even though you may use a finite state machine to implement it. But it has to be an infinite state machine, because they all look back.
You'll notice I was very careful not to say finite. I was very careful not to say finite.
I've got a question about the proposal there, John. I like the idea of being able to take a physical meeting and move it online, and I think the proposal addresses that. I think there's definitely going to be questions of scale, as I think Doug just said. How much can you scale it? I think that debugging it will have to happen because you're introducing a domain that is taking place in. But my main question is, you brought it up as saying, well, there are these difficult problems like abortion or that are not about lack of understanding, but it's difficult problems. And I'm wondering how, it seems that if our normal Robert's Rules of Order meetings can't resolve those problems right now, how this helps.
They actually do. They do not solve it to everybody's satisfaction. They solve it to the satisfaction of the majority. That's why I say, Roberts isn't something special, and the rules of the House of Commons aren't special. They're what fall out when you say, given an otherwise irresolvable problem upon which we cannot achieve consensus, we'll go with a majority. Once you make that one decision, the rest is just detail. The rest falls out of that.
Yeah, with a glance to Dick Karpinski, again, thanking him for pointing me to the IBIS concept. What John is suggesting is a way of solving complex problems that hard to achieve a consensus on. And what Dave pointed out was that there are other ways to do it. So this question is directed mostly towards Dave and to anyone else who can come up with a solution. What other alternatives exist? And the judicial decisions is a great concept, because there's something that automatically requires a knowledge repository of some sort. So it would seem to be a good model to attack. And what other alternatives are there? What other sorts of things exist as procedures that we could possibly model, just in the interest of throwing open the design space?
Do you want to get back to him, Dave?
Well, I was not trying to say, oh, let's look at other models, although I think that's a wonderful idea. Thank you for suggesting it and attributing it to me. What I was trying to say is, as we try to move existing models into this environment, we should be particularly aware of the fact that they won't work as is. And for that matter, I think the most important thing is exactly what you took, which wasn't what I was saying, but I wish I had, and that is that there are multiple models. We need to recognize the importance of the variety and not lock ourselves into one, and in particular not one that's too rigid for where, quote unquote, where the real work gets done. And I'm particularly appreciative of the fact that one of our speakers is not from the U.S., because it raises this point that what works in one place, not only in one style of task, not only do we have to have a variety of mechanisms because of a variety of tasks, but we also have a variety of cultures. And of course, one of the really fun parts is the internet brings them all together, and go figure what the right balance is.
We have 4 more minutes. Anyway, you had one.
Yes, Warren Stringer. I was inspired by Barbara's question to John about what is the interface, and by Dave's reflection that there is some limitations to Robert's Rules of Order, aside from that the book itself looks like a brick, which kind of reminds me of last week's de-augmenting the pencil by tying a brick to it. So I'm inspired also by, there was a meeting I had previously today with a company called Webbox, which is a facilitator for corporate communications. They take, for instance, the Sacramento Municipal Utilities Commission. What is their corporate culture? And what I see is that what they do is they visualize the process and create these diagrams. And what I see what they're doing is they're actually embodying what is their corporate culture for communication into a fixed state. And in fact, you can use that fixed state as a point of context in which for people to create a dialogue. And so here is a situation where it's a bureaucracy. I'm not sure if actually majority rules in that particular bureaucracy, but you can take facilitators in terms of who take what is the corporate culture that is probably embodies quite a wide range of different forms of reaching a decision, and embody that in terms of what is representation that could be visual, and then from acting upon that visual representation as a context in which to create a dialogue. And then from there, you can actually embody rules which also allow people to interact with each other based on that particular static context. So that's trying to expand upon, I think, Eric, the suggestion, what are the alternative methods aside from Robert's Rules of Order? And here's one company that's facilitating that sort of process.
We're closing down. It's well, short.
I have a short anecdote. We looked at Robert's Rules of Order, even though they're written in 1850s. The family still owns the copyright because they keep updating it, so it brings an interesting issue.
That's why the book is so thick. It's taken 9 editions of adding stuff to keep the copyright. That's right. He's right.
Malin?
I want to make an analogy to the whole question of genetic diversity. When we talk about different models about how different groups work, that the internet actually introduces this whole thing of, if we start, say, we put the governance of Robert's Rules of Order and put that internationally, then we lose the diversity of the decision-making and the way different cultures do things. And, you know, it might be the case that something comes along and a dictatorship is the right way for the world to survive, but we've lost that because the internet's imposed, say, Robert's Rules of Orders on all societies. So, I mean, there is a parallel to the genetic diversity issue to this.
Can I say one thing? Several people here have mistaken what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that I don't like Roberts that well. I'm not saying that we should use it for a bunch of things. What I'm saying is we should take the hundreds of thousands of organizations that legally operate under it and put them online. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, one thing I want to just announce sort of is that the intention is that all this dialogue gets transcribed, and it would be put online as text, transcribed apparently, and then something that among the techie people that would like to get started, I'm starting to try to talk to them about how we can then go through that and provide that every different paragraph, speaker, etc. is addressable by explicitly with a URL, so that then people can start making comments about particular passages that went on like that. And then the thing that was mentioned the other day about the backlink management, the CRIT, would be you could go through and find out who is talking about it and back up to them. So it'd be just marvelous if we could start getting some of those capabilities integrated into the processes that we're trying to do. I think we're closing down, so I think what we're going to have to do is just say, okay, that's the end of the broadcast any minute now, and I don't see why we have to exactly quit. And one thing we've started doing 3 weeks ago was to retire to the cafeteria that serves pizza late and has lots of space in it for talking. So that's let us go on further. But they're kind of patient here, so if people want to stay around and talk for another 10 minutes or so, that's suitable. So I'm assuming we just would call this adjourned, and it's been a great meeting, and see some of you. Oh, I should just tell people that I've got somebody coming in 2 weeks that you have to be prepared for. It's a guy named Ted Nelson that I've known for a long time. And he's just sort of jumping up and down like this to tell you.
We have to be hyper-prepared.
So he's got really interesting ideas, etc. That this Kodiak business about integration is just a very, very, very important thing. That we need to integrate all the kind of great ideas and stuff that are coming from wherever. So that's what we need to do. So okay, thank you.